Hey, what's up, everybody? It's me, Danae, and I'm here with the message for you. So here we are today. Today is Tuesday, October 14th, 2025. The time on the clock is 12:45 exactly. Okay. So, after strange pre-shuffle and cut of the cards, this is where we land today on the Devil card, which unfortunately is very much so in alignment with the preview of the message that I was seeing as I was shuffling. So it was so strange and so all over the place that I really don't know where to start, but I decided to just press record because the more I was channeling in the pre-shuffle, the more wild it was getting. So I'm like, you know what? It doesn't seem like it's going to mellow out too much. I just better just let the spirit lead at this point because it was just doing too much in the pre-shuffle. So I started the message channeling that the overall was like, it's all good, it's all love, or it's all love, it's all good. It's all love, it's all good is what I heard. And it was pretty much about like the preservation of love and how, regardless of how many attempts there have been to, particularly the Ace of Cups was one of the prominent cards that kept showing up on the bottom, as I was shuffling. And it was like, no matter how many nefarious attempts there have been to, I guess, squelch. I don't think that's really a word, but I know you know what I mean. Like to pretty much, to dry love up, to completely like, how do you say that? I want to know a word for that. It's not coming to me, but I would say drain love and the collective consciousness or even throughout humanity. And there have been many attempts over and over again that seems to have been the focus and the goal of diabolical agendas to pretty much stomp love out as much as possible, to the point either where people no longer believe in it, they no longer have faith for it, they no longer feel it within themselves for themselves, they no longer feel worthy of it from any other source outside of themselves, from one to another or a higher source. And over again, like that's been the agenda, is to create as much fear and doubt and the collective consciousness to the point where love is like pretty much like a figment of imagination, a mere fantasy at many points. But what I was getting is that no matter how many attempts there were, and they were fierce attempts, relentless attempts, love still stands, which brings me back to it's all love, it's all good. It's like where love may have seemed to have taken a hiatus, or even now where it seems like, sometimes love seems absent from our day-to-day lives, and it feels just, like everybody's just trying to survive. It's been hidden. I heard something about it being hidden in plain sight. And then some cards that came out to support that were like the Lovers came out, the Two of Cups came out, a lot of love energy. The Queen of Cups came out multiple times. It's like it's been hidden in plain sight where it seemed like all hope was lost, all love was lost. It's never been lost. It's never been absent. It's never been eliminated from our consciousness. Sometimes it's been buried, but it's never been fully eliminated. And the ways in which I was seeing that it's been hidden in plain sight is through humanity, like through individuals that, for however it's been designed for them to do so. It's the opposite of this, pretty much. The lovers, like individuals that just carry that love vibration no matter what they incur. Some folks that have been through quite a bit in life, a lot of trials and tribulations, but still somehow are able to maintain the frequency of love for themselves, within themselves, for humanity, for divinity, for creation overall. And that's been more or less the saving grace of all of humanity and all of creation, are those few remnants that have fortified the frequency of love in a way that is able to be generated, over and over again, or at such a magnitude, or at such hertz. I don't know why that word is coming up, at such a level of hertz that it can resonate for the world, if you can believe that or not. So what was coming up, another thing that was coming up while I was channeling all of that, I kept hearing Indiana Jones. And Indiana Jones has a lot of different references for me. My mom loved Indiana Jones. I was obviously more or less too young to really, really know all of the movies, but I remember her watching them. And the only one that is most familiar to me, which ironically turns out to be one of the darkest ones, is Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. So I kept hearing that throughout all the channeling I was doing of other things. I kept hearing Indiana Jones. So I'm like, all right, well, let me go ahead and do a little shallow dive into what Indiana Jones might be trying to say. So I'll go on trusty old YouTube, of course, and just to look at a few clips to kind of refresh my memory, because I remember some parts of it. My phone's going off at 12:52, and that was the mailman. That was my Ring camera, by the way. So it's message. so I go to refresh my memory about this Indiana Jones Temple of Doom, and my God, was it ever so dark, like so dark. And I'll just breeze through a couple of the clips. Maybe I'll post some, but it was just like, wow. There was one clip that was pretty much like a sacrifice scene where they were in some dark cave. There was like some tribal gathering of sorts, headed by someone who had horns on his head that definitely was given demonic energy, and was making a sacrifice of a man. And basically what they would do is what he was doing is reaching into his chest and ripping out his heart while he was alive. In this particular sacrifice, Indiana Jones, the queen, I forget what her name is, maybe her name was Christine, I can't remember, and then the little Asian boy that they had in their midst, I guess, I forget how they became acquainted, but there's some story behind how the little Asian kid hooked up with them. I think he was kind of like showing them the ropes or something like that. But anyway, they're watching from a distance and hiding, but they're seeing this ceremony play out of him ripping out the man's heart from his chest, and he was still alive. So because he was still alive, I guess, well, actually, I feel like that was a part of the sacrifice. Like this shaman of sorts, like this dark shaman was able to rip the hearts out of his chest, or maybe with the right sacrifice. I don't know. Like I said, I can't really remember. I would have to go watch the whole movie. But because he was able to rip his heart out and he still lived, like survive, that made him somewhat of a living sacrifice or a perfect sacrifice. So after that, he was all chained up, of course, and then they lowered him into a fiery pit, and he pretty much burnt him alive. And then the heart began to burn in the shaman's hands. Let's call him a priest, a dark priest, because shaman, I think that's just not fair. There are light priests and there are dark priests, but I think a shaman is a shaman. Like, I don't think there's much darkness there. So let's call him a dark priest. The heart started burning in his hands. Then there was cut to another scene where, and of course, all of the tribal people are like, you know, in like a cannibalistic stir, like shouting and cheering and, praising the sacrifice that they witnessed or whatever. For whatever reason, I don't know. I know he said Kali Ma, which I don't know a lot about Kali Ma, but I know that I'm pretty sure that that's a deity in the Indian culture, and usually the deities are synonymous with other deities, which I should probably look up at some point real quick before I close out, since I said it, because I'm sure it has some resonance as well. But I don't know a lot about Kali Ma, but I'm familiar with the name. But he was chanting her name like almost as if he was making the sacrifice to her. But of course, like I would imagine that his ideals about this sacrifice were distorted in a sense where, people think even in Christianity that they're doing things for the glory of God or for Jesus' sake. And sometimes it's the very opposite of what Jesus or God would have wanted, So there's no disrespect to Kali Ma, who I'm sure is of light in some regard in that culture, but this is what the priest was pretty much worshiping at that time. So then there was another scene where Indiana Jones and the queen and the Asian kid were freeing all of these child slaves. So that was a whole nother aspect of it. It was just very, very dark. And then I think it was pretty much like one of the ending scenes where Indiana Jones had to fight his way out of, they had to pretty much fight their way out of the adversaries that were coming to answer their releasing the slaves and whatever else they were trying to do. And high up in the distance, there was a child that had been possessed to, you could tell was like of that Indian culture because of how they were dressed, but they were pretty much possessed to work for the adversaries, use their magic to work for the adversary, because they had a voodoo doll of Indiana Jones. And so every time Indiana Jones was trying to fight off this particular, adversary that was really much bigger than him, the child was stabbing this voodoo doll, or whatever they call it in their culture, because that's probably not what it was called, but this rag doll of sorts, enchanted rag doll, they were stabbing it so that it would pretty much inhibit Indiana Jones from fighting, because he would have these like sharp pains like in his back or wherever she was stabbing the doll. So there was another dark aspect. Mind you, I definitely saw the moon. I forgot to say that. That's which the moon and the Seven of Swords. So that's what made me keen to the presence of some like, mystical, and the Seven of Cups, some type of mystical energy that's been going on, beyond the veil, behind the veil, in the underworld, wherever it is, that's been anywhere it could happen in opposition to the light and to divinity and creation at its best, is where it's ultimate. The light, meaning the sun, is what's being shown on those dark spaces, so that it can no longer be a mystery. And the faces of those who have worn masks in those places are now being revealed and exposed. And the sun and the devil actually came up together in the pre-shuffle. So it's interesting that after I cut the cards, this is where we are. Like, this is the reveal. This is the exposure. This is what's been going on. You know, like the dark forces and agendas that have been notorious in our lifetime at least, but certainly many lifetimes before, have been ultimately siphoning innocence for their force fuel. You know, whether it be children actually, whether it be children of the divine or children of the light, theoretically, whether it is just innocent people or that are just unsuspecting, and those that just don't know any better or don't believe in such mysticism and darkness. Some would never, like, you look at Indiana Jones as a movie and you're like, oh, that's just a movie. But it's like, no, you know, like, art imitates life, you know, and yes, it may be for entertainment purposes, but there are definitely aspects of the strangest things that we could see in a fantastical way, as I like to say, that exist very much so in a realistic sense, you know. So, and that's part of the unveiling and the exposure, so that soon enough, no one can claim ignorance, you know, or no one can claim to ultimately not have seen with their eyes. You know, like, everyone more or less gets to be a believer by way of what they've actually witnessed in some way, shape, or form, so that it can dispel the ignorance, you know, from creation overall. So then at that point, you either know how to react and respond, or reject, or readjust, repent, perhaps, like whatever it is that's needed, will be a reasonable request at that point, because no one will be able to say they didn't know or they didn't believe that such things were true or could exist, or whatever the case may be. But as I like to bring it back to the highest point of light, it's all love, it's all good. Even the darkest of it all has been purposeful, or has been transmuted for a purpose, you know, and can be transmuted for a purpose, from the divine aspect to the human aspect of creation. So even with this being the landing card here today, it's not to evoke fear or rage, anger, scarcity, or anything of the sort, you know. It's just to promote awareness, to promote awareness and enlightenment at the absolute best. All right, so yeah, a lot of imagery, a lot of dark imagery in those scenes. It was pretty wild, but you know, as it is in the movies, where we could consider, oh, that's just the movies, there's always a happy ending. So if we can assume that for our everyday lives, for our real life experience, then we can ultimately wield it to be true, you know. And that's the power that we get to acclaim and reclaim as creators in our own right, that we can ultimately navigate or redirect this the plot in our lives to ultimately have the highest vibrational outcome that we can perceive and conceive of, no matter what the antagonist persists or how the antagonist persists. All right, so let's see what we got here. Ooh, almost threw that one out. Four of Cups. There's that Ace of Cups there that's being offered, but someone is not receiving it. Let's see. Oh, Nine of Swords. This came up a lot too, the Nine of Swords. Because there's a grave disappointment in amongst those that have been in favor. Okay, this is like anti-love, that have been in favor of this anti-love agenda. Now it's like they're being haunted by their choices, by their actions, by their investments, by their entanglements, by their the contracts that have been forged with said nefarious forces, like whomever they've aligned with that has been against, you know, ultimately creation in its highest frequency, you know, being productive in a creative sense and not destructive. And for some, not benefit of the doubt with grace, some not knowing what they were contributing to or creating at a certain point. So there's some ignorance, you know, there was some veil that was creating an illusion or a distortion on what people were actually investing themselves into or connecting themselves to. There's definitely that, but there are also those that were willingly participating in destructive behaviors that were not just destructive to themselves, but to others. If anything, destructive to others for the purposes of advancing themselves or their own personal agenda. And now it's like all of that's coming back to haunt some at this point, largely on account of regret for missteps, but also because of the present inventory of return and reward on said investments being so, you know, minimal at best, but non-existent at the worst, like having nothing to show for everything that they've done at this point is devastating, to say the least. And that's what I'm saying. It's like, this is just in this lifetime, in this season, let alone, you know, but this is pretty much the cycle that's been occurring for longer than we can even remember, you know. So imagine how devastating it is for the tides to change suddenly when it seems like, you're on the right side of the coin for so long, because this is how it's always been done. It's like a complete shock to the senses to just wake up one day and realize that you're on the wrong team, doing the wrong things, and you have a losing strategy. Like, what do you do? Wow, Tower. Yeah, it's like everything's falling apart around people. And, as we say with the Tower, it's all for reestablishing a more stable foundation, but it's no less devastating. I keep hearing that word in the process of that reconstruction, or in some cases it can be reconstruction, in some cases it could just be total destruction or obliteration, with no projection in sight of reestablishment, for some things, because for some things there is no rebuild. It's like some things have to be completely demolished in order for something new and more foundationally sound to be constructed. But we know with construction of things that last anyway, and things that are safe, it could take some time. So that's the other devastation here with the Nine of Swords. Is like, where it is you might be willing to surrender to the change, the anxiety is in not knowing how long it's going to be until you're back on your feet, whatever that means, or how long it's going to be till you find some balance or some comfort or some security, some refuge. The Tower could be for individuals in this capacity, could be a series of unfortunate events, not just one big, event. It could be many. It could be breaking up with a partner. It could be losing a job. It could be being outcasted from friends or associations that you were once welcomed in. It could be losing a home. It could be, your livelihood being completely shaken up. Shoot, it could be the stock market crash. Like, I know that there's been some issues in the stock market as of late, especially due to this government shutdown. It could be something like that, where you had all your eggs in the basket for your retirement or for your comfort, to all tied up in stocks or whatever that seemed to be fail-proof. And now it's like, look at this arrow going down. You know what I mean? It's like people are being thrown out of ivory towers that were built on sand, ultimately. And it's like watching a building collapse in front of you. There's nothing, what are you going to do? Or even a building on fire in front of you. Is like, you're not going to go in and try to retrieve your cell phone. You know what I mean? Like, the only thing that would be retrievable are people. And sometimes even the bravest firemen can't do that. They can't go back in if the conditions have advanced to a certain dangerous place. It's like there's the sacrifice that gets to be made. And so it's ultimately like the backlash or the return of energy from sacrifices that have been made, on the account of others' misfortune, or even on the account of one's own soul. Like, there's still a penitence. What is that? Penitence that needs to be made or paid. I don't know what. I'm not really sure about that word. I know it's something like retribution, but it feels more religious, like penitence, like almost like like what do you call it? Like a confession or something like that. I don't know. But anyway, yeah, something like that where there's no way the destruction or the dismantling of certain structures is inevitable, and it can't be reversed. It really can't be stopped, and anyone or anything that is attached to it is ultimately in jeopardy of harm, or at least of some type of impact. That's going to be a cause for rehabilitation or recovery in some way, shape, or form. Maybe spiritually, maybe physically, maybe mentally. Shoot, oh man. I'm seeing it could even be people jumping from burning buildings, God forbid, or jumping to their demise on account of all the destruction that they're experiencing and it being so overwhelming. But I just heard, like, for many in this season, you don't get to check out on your own accord. Like, you don't get to just say, that's it, I'm out of here, it's too much. Like, it'll be like somebody jumping out of a window at a high altitude only to survive it, but they're like, quadriplegic or something like that. It's like you might as well just took it on the chin, literally, because at least you'll be walking your path of repentance or whatever it is, as opposed to, willing your path, or having somebody will you, unfortunately, So it's something like that here, like, because when I thought of that, I saw the guy still being alive after his heart was ripped out. And it's like, for some, they may want to check out or want some relief, but there's some retribution that must be paid before people find relief. Most people find relief in that type of way. And here is the mystical aspect of it. Those that may succeed in relieving themselves in this lifetime may still have penitence to pay in the next. So it's like you might as well get it over with, because you don't know how you're going to come back next time or what the other side of mortality looks like. None of us really do, because one way or another that debt must be repaid, or even if it gets passed down to your children and stuff like that. It's like you should just pay what you owe while you're here and while you have the body and the capacity to do so. But that's a personal choice. All right, we're at 33. All right, let me speed it up. Yeah, it's like, look, this little page of cups for this tower fire. Like, what's that gonna do? It's like that's funny. I just heard, like, those, I think, is it Geico? Is it Geico that does those commercials? Whatever the commercial is, where it's like they say something that's bad, like something that's unfavorable, but then they say, but good news, I just saved a bundle by switching to, I think it is Geico, by switching to Geico for my car insurance or something like that. Like, that's what I just heard. It's like, with all this devastation going on, what is this Page of Cups really going to do to put out this fire? It's like, thanks, good for you, or great for me, whatever the case may be. It's like, okay, well, somebody create insurance fraud. Like, maybe some people trying to burn down their estates are burned down. Oh, that makes sense in a practical way. Liquidating assets in a fraudulent way to recoup their losses. Oh man. But then come to find out, you don't have fire insurance. You know, I mean, I'm sure somebody would check on that before they made stuff. But then again, you never know what people do out of desperation or compulsively to get themselves out of a jam when they're not thinking, properly. You could make a decision that would ultimately put you in a worse position than if you would have just, allowed the foreclosure or whatever the case may be. Whatever it is that we're talking about here, not exclusive to property, but that's just how it's showing up, so that's how I'm speaking on it. But yeah, like something about that, like people taking compulsive measures to relieve themselves of certain debts, or just trying to liquidate funds so that they have something, to support themselves, I suppose. I don't know. But like I said, it's like doing that and then realizing that you have flood insurance, you don't have fire insurance. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, or the insurance that you have is so minimal that it's not even going to cover, like, maybe here it is, like, a property could be so underwater in terms of what's owed that it doesn't even balance out. I'm not really sure how those things fully work, but that just makes sense to me. Like, maybe you owe so much on a mortgage that what you have, what you get in your claim doesn't even scratch the surface of what you owe, let alone what it would take to rebuild or reconstruct, or, you know what I mean? Like something like that. Page of Cups is questionable anyway. Like, it just depends, because that fish in that cup is always, it's always a question mark for me. Like, what is the news here? Like I said, I just saved the bundle, I switched to Geico or whatever it is. Like, that doesn't really do me any good at this point. Or where maybe some people cut corners in their like this like almost over self-assurance, like they were overconfident. What's the word for that? Arrogance. In their arrogance, they could have cut corners, like, oh, nothing's ever going to happen, or we're good. That's a disaster like that could never happen. The stock market will always bounce back. Like, just having a certain arrogance about their invincibility. Well, that makes sense, because as I said, it's like tides are turning almost immediately or seemingly out of nowhere, which is not out of nowhere. There were signs, but people weren't really, here it is, weren't heeding the signs of the turn, of the change that was in the air. And so they continued to carry on in the way that they saw fit, a way that was most comfortable to them, only now to be in the midst of the demolition with no choice but to literally jump out, you know what I mean, with no parachute in some regards. Yeah, people just thinking that they'll always be covered. Insurance, like they'll always be protected. They're too big to fail. They're too connected to be condemned or to be convicted. You know what I mean? Too connected to be convicted. Well, we've seen the evidence of that time and time again, and nobody's bigger than the system. So we got the Strength card here, which is exactly my point. Like, feeling too big, too strong, too powerful against the system. But what's on the other side of that Strength? Wow. You thought you was bigger. What? Than the divine? Oh, a lot of, what's the word? It's not just arrogance now. What is that? What is the word for more than arrogance when you think you bigger than God? That's what this is giving. Because, I mean, thinking you bigger than the angel, the commander of the angel armies, is pretty much you saying that you feel bigger than the divine. As my phone lights up at 125, okay? That's an 8 altogether. Like, you're bigger than infinity here at the top of her head. Stronger than the universe. Like, somehow you are empowered to call the shots. And maybe because, that's what's been happening, or it seemed like that's the illusion that's been perpetuated cycle after cycle, lifetime after lifetime, But it always comes back to one, like it always comes back to to source. And when source decides that something is no longer sustainable for creation as it has created it, or intended for it to persist, that's the end. And no man knows the day or the hour when that shift occurs, but we all bear witness to it at the time of its unveiling. At some point or another, maybe some are slow to recognize, as I said, the handwriting on the wall, the signs and signals, but eventually it's irrefutable and it's inevitable. Especially when it becomes an impairment of your own, then it's like, like when you can't move like you used to, figuratively or actually, then it's like, damn, I guess this is what it is now, or I guess this is why it is, then you start to have that come to Jesus moment, or that moment of revelation of all the other times when you were being nudged in the past, like, here, drink this cup, heal your wounds, heal your insecurities, your confront your fears, manage your traumas. Shoot, accept yourself as you are, without this feverish ambition to always be something else beyond what you were designed to be, or better yet, to be what someone else was designed to be, or have what someone else has. Those are the imbalances that provoke nefarious acts, as they were and as they are, that ultimately leads you into the danger zone. And then once you're already there, that's that illusion of that demonic force that we saw. It's like, now you hear, now what do? Backtrack to something noble that doesn't guarantee that you'll have all of the spoils of where you are at this moment. Like, the sacrifice for some at this point of offering the Four of Cups, has been too great to repent. And then when you have, again, that illusion of false security, false assurance, as opposed to blessed assurance, which I talked about in the last message, to more or less encourage you to keep at it. Like, are you good? This is how we do it. The noble way is for peons, for peasants. Like, we leave that spiritual stuff to them. This is how you get ahead in this realm, in this life, in this dimension. My phone's going off at 1:30. This is how you get ahead. This is how it's done. If you're not doing it this way, you ain't doing it, and you're going to get left behind. And then you look around and you see, your surroundings more or less, in an illusionary way, confirm that truth, or confirm, I should say, that lie. So you feel like, well, I must be doing it right. The evidence is in my life. The evidence is around me. You look around at people that may or be doing it the so-called noble way or the hard way or honest living or whatever, and they don't really look like they doing too well. Back to the beginning where I said, those that have maintained that frequency of love and have refused to sell themselves short, sell their souls, sell anybody else out, to sell their morals, their standards, to sacrifice their morals and ethical standards for the exchange of material gain or affluence. Like, many haven't really looked all that great to the naked eye. There's been the appearance of struggle and constant striving and poverty in some ways and misfortune in others, and it doesn't really look all that appealing when you can't really see peace of mind necessarily on someone's sleeves, like love itself on someone's sleeves, for all the struggle that you see them going through to maintain that frequency. It doesn't really make for a convincing cause for nobility, which is also why I believe the tides are changing and there's a transference of wealth and power. So here it is on the light side of the spectrum, this enlightenment, this exposure of the fact that it can be quite luxurious to live in the light. As a matter of fact, once you've paid, and I don't know if this is how it continues to be, because I feel like a lot of our generation or this season of creation is actually shaving the learning curve for those that come after us. So it doesn't have to be, oh, I struggled first and then I got to the good stuff. I mean, they may have their own struggle, but it won't be what we've experienced, where you almost feel like you got to go through the muck and the mire to experience anything, anything splendid or pleasurable, or, that's part of the reason why others were resistant to that pathway, because of how it looked. Well, I got to go through that just to come out, reasonably on the other side, with still no guarantee. Like I said, it wasn't really a convincing path on sight. But I feel like the tides, literally temperance, is rebalancing those cups, so that when you look around and you see people that are operating in the highest frequency and their spiritual strength expressed through their humanity, you also get to see the value of that in the material sense, that we humans are appealed to it or appealed by it, or however that needs to be said. How, in a way that it's appealing to humanity, as I was saying, like through material, through, like, to see somebody on a spiritual path, or just not, it doesn't have to be spiritual or religious, but just aspiring to be their best self, creatively, productively, energetically, and it actually paying off for them. Like, they actually look like $1,000,000. They actually look like they're happy. They're actually living their best life in a way that it can be seen and witnessed. They're actually doing something in the capacity that they seem to be successful at, and it seems to bring them joy or peace, or, like, there is success in their businesses or in their, you know, whatever endeavors that they set out upon. They're not necessarily attached or chained to anything sacrificial that doesn't bring light into their lives for the sake of survival. Like that life exists, you know, where there is bliss, benevolence, and security. In what world? In what fantasy? In what movie? You know what I mean? So I feel like that's where the tides are shifting, so that that can be on display, so that that can be the thing to aspire to, and the thing of inspiration. So for those that have maybe made a misstep, but perhaps still have the time and the energy to course correct, can see, oh, I could have done it this way all along, and maybe now will aspire to do so. And for those that are kind of straddled the middle and maybe didn't know what was what, you know, or didn't know that such a thing was possible, they can quickly shift directions to put themselves on the pathway to what may have seemed unattainable at one point in time. You know, so it's all love, it's all good is the point, you know. And for those that refuse still, with all that they see, with all that they know, with all that they experienced even firsthand, they ultimately, you know, are writing their own fate as well. You know, everybody is pretty much writing their own ending, some way, shape, or form. In some way, shape, or form. With the Page of Pentacles, another message, and the Queen of Wands. With the energies, Queen of Wands came up too in the pre-shuffle with the Queen of Cups. And this, to me, I felt was like the energy and the reproductive frequency to create and to transmute anything, you know, like any situation, any circumstance, like to have it your way ultimately. And with very little here with the Page of Pentacles, with very little to start with in some cases. Like it don't take much but a decision, you know, an ambition, a drive, a passion for something productive, that is. And you could accelerate damn near overnight, so it may seem to others, you know, may even be an accelerated advancement in this season, where, as I said, those that have kind of like, you know, before us and even with us, that have stayed the course, as treacherous as it may have been, to maintain that frequency of love and pure passion for one's desires and for conscious creativity, that might not be the case anymore. You know, where, like I said, you could easily see the inspiration and say, well, I want to live like that. You might not have to go the dark night of the soul per se, not as dark as it has been in the past, because the thing is, like, where these nefarious forces were in some ways reigning supreme over creation, and the other end of the spectrum was holding on for dear life, it made the road more arduous to trek, you know, where it didn't even necessarily have to be that hard, because you had your own insecurities and conditionings to manage and to overcome, but then you had what was being projected onto you that wasn't even yours to assume, you know, as well. And then the obstacles being placed in front of you to make what was already a challenge that, like, almost unbearable, you know, or impossible in some ways. But there was angelic assistance, divine ordination, and of course, not without the tenacity and determination of those who embodied the spirit of pure passion and love and all those things that I'm saying, no matter what, there had to be a co-creation of those two forces in order for it to come out the way that it has ultimately, and for the trajectory that it's on. But for those now, the hardest work has been done, I believe. I feel like the next challenge really is to just learn how to live in the luxury of light without feeling like you have to always be on the defense, and feeling like at any minute there's going to be an attack or an interference or an interruption or an implosion or explosion. Like, that's the next challenge, because that is kind of like it's an illusion of darkness in itself, for you to have done so much work to get to a certain point, but still kind of somewhat live in the fear of when you were in war, like PTSD, pretty much in a term. That is a spirit. That in itself is a dark spirit, and it's a projection of adverse energies to more or less keep you from living in the frequency of love that you ultimately have, earned for yourself or created for yourself, or that's certainly been preserved for you to indulge in some way, shape, or form. And if you're not living in it, by God, for all the work that you've done to obtain it and achieve it and integrate it into your life, how can anyone see that example and be so inspired? So like, that's why it's the next challenge, because there needs to be an exhibition of love in a way that's undeniable, so that observers, watchers, those of the next generation can see that it doesn't have to be the way that it was. You can be just as secure and happy and doing things in a noble sense, in a noble fashion, if not more so than anything otherwise. It needs to be seen. So yeah, so if you're doing God's work, as they say, and that really is just being true to yourself, living in integrity, again, following your purest passions, working toward the things that exemplify a life of love, that really put it on display in some way. And it could just be for you and yours. It ain't got to be nothing outrageously benevolent, really. It doesn't. It becomes that, almost like it takes on a life of its own, just by you kind of accepting that love and that security for yourself, and knowing that that's enough. Like, you don't have to do too much, really, to make a difference. Then there's a special protection and covering for you to carry out that mission. Like, you are, what's the word? You're precious to the divine, for sure, but there's another word that I heard. It was like an army term, or like some type of military term, where it's like you're like invaluable, or I can't hear the word now. I heard it though. I heard it. I can't hear it now. Yeah, so anyway, right at 59, so I'm gonna stop it here. Thank you for listening and watching. Keep doing what you're doing. Godspeed to you and all that you do. For sure, know that you're already protected with the highest level of insurance by way of your blessed assurance. And thank you for your contribution to creation into the collective consciousness. We all help each other. All right. All right. Happy Tuesday to you. And until next time, as always, I leave you with peace.